Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Dan Cardolicchio. Want to welcome you to another version of Destination Health Podcast, Finding Function in a Dysfunctional World. As soon as I went on, the phone started to ring, Dr. Melanie, just to let you know. So I didn't take it out of the office, but that's okay. Hopefully the staff will pick it up very quickly instead of me going, okay, I got to hang up. So welcome to the show today. How are you? You're in Florida.
Great.
You're in
Yes.
Florida, and I'm jealous.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, we're just coming out of our little bit of cold weather, so hopefully it's warming up soon.
Yeah, the cold weather is 50s, 60s, 70s. So those of us that are here in the Northeast that hit 10 below this winter, we have no sympathy for those individuals in Florida.
I know.
Because they have no idea, although Dr. Melanie said she is from Ohio. And so, she knows what cold is. So anyway, Dr. Melanie, joyful adventure in healthy living did not begin as such. Her teen years were fraught with food allergies, heart condition, chronic low energy. Through self-education, formal research, carefully calibrated lifestyle changes, her biology began restoring and even optimizing. Her condition then became her calling. I love that. Undergirded by a master's in complementary and alternative medicine, a doctorate in Christian counseling, and most importantly, living personal proof, she began guiding others to inside out health. She has a virtual practice, board certified holistic health specialist through the American Council of Holistic Medicine. Let's get right into it, Dr. Melanie. What happened with these food allergies and what was your health condition that you experienced?
Yeah, I really started to have symptoms that scared me. I began having very serious chest pain and left arm pain, and I would have these episodes that I couldn't ignore. And so I began to see medical doctors, was referred to cardiologists, and I was diagnosed with a heart condition at 21. And that was a pretty big wake-up call for me. And I went through many medical practitioners. None of them were really giving me answers. And I was giving this diagnosis of I would have to take painkillers and anti-inflammatories for the rest of my life. And I didn't know anything about natural medicine. I was not raised with a natural health mindset.
None of us were, right? Because, what we were saying before we came on, our mess is our success. So none of us really are until we go through something that changes our life, right?
That's absolutely true. Yeah, we have to go through it ourselves. And so I wanted answers. I didn't want a diagnosis, and I wanted someone to help me figure out what was the root cause of all of these symptoms, because the fatigue and the allergies and the joint pain, I could kind of, get through that. But I started seeing natural health practitioners. I started seeing chiropractors. I started seeing naturopaths. And the plan that most of them gave me was dietary changes, lifestyle changes, stress reduction techniques, and supplements. And I faithfully followed what several different practitioners, told me about. And my life, it was like I got a new life. All of a sudden, I didn't have fatigue. I didn't have any more painful episodes. I went back to go get my heart tested, and they said, there's nothing wrong here. The echocardiogram is perfect. And so I knew within, though, that something in my system changed. And it was through following, their advice. And my life changed so drastically that I wanted to switch careers. At that point, I was already teaching. I ended up, instead of getting my master's degree in reading, I got my master's degree in alternative medicine. So I totally veered off the path. And after I graduated, I worked for a chiropractor, and then I went on my own, and I established my practice in an herb shop for 10 years. And last year I switched to completely virtual.
Awesome. Now, let's go back to that time when you were going through all of the bad stuff, if you will. Was your life stressful, and how was that stressful for you?
Yeah, so I had a lack of boundaries, and I was constantly helping other people. So I constantly, chronically put myself last. And I was always giving, always serving on way
Mhm.
too many committees. I was in college and I was just 24/7 stressed, staying up late, drinking a lot of coffee, eating a ton of carbs. And I was just not leading a healthy lifestyle. And I think my system at age 21, it just said enough is enough. Some
Mhm.
people, that's when they're in their 50s and 60s. At 21, it was like, this is it. And it was the wake up call that I needed to make changes. Otherwise, I
Mhm.
don't think I would have made changes.
Right. Sure. And and most of us just continue to go on at that point without making those changes. So just to let you know my story, at the tender age of 37, I had a heart attack. My triglycerides were 1,227.
Wow.
And then my
Wow.
cholesterol was upwards towards 600, 700, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So those are very high numbers, but it was very stressful. I had offices in 3 different states because my ADHD kicked in. And I said, why not? I'm licensed in New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. So I'll just open up offices there, right? Along the Belt Parkway,
Wow.
along the Belt Parkway, um, there is by the riding academy, there's a hot dog truck. There's a dirty water dog truck, as we say here in the Northeast. Every Friday around 1 o'clock, going from my New Jersey office to the New York office, there were 3 dogs, mustard, sauerkraut with a can of sugary soda. And I put $1 down because that's what it cost back then, or at least for me, because I was there every Friday. And did you find when you were during this stressful time, you're on committees, you're just doing a lot of different things. And the moral of this line of questioning is that you just started eating poorly because whatever was there, that's what you ate, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Whatever carbs, whatever sugary sweets could get me through. It's like I certainly had fatigue, and my body looked for those types of foods that would
Mhm.
give me a quick burst of energy, but there was no fuel. There was nothing long lasting.
Yeah. There was no nutritional value to it. It just gave you that quick. What was your favorite? Tell me, what was your favorite? What did you go to?
The probably, those really addicting, high sugar, high carb foods. I mean, I could down a package of EL fudge cookies every single night. I mean, that was just something that I could do. And I was a small person, so it wasn't as if I had like a weight problem. So no one would ever, say something to me.
Right,
But it was those high sugar, high carb foods.
right. You know what? There was a study that was done several years ago. Now that you're talking about this in Spain, it was in Mayo Clinic proceedings, and these processed foods, high in omega-6 fatty acids,
Yeah,
arachidonic cascade,
yeah,
inflammation. I don't remember anything about the article. I don't remember the confidence intervals, the p-values. These processed foods are highly palatable, readily available, and readily affordable.
yeah.
So they're just easy to purchase, and they can really do damage to your body when it comes to this. What was your mindset like prior to you being diagnosed with a heart condition? Did you feel good about yourself? Did you know you were going down this rabbit hole, this valley of despair, in other words?
I was totally unconscious to it. I was
Mhm.
very disconnected from myself. And like I said, I was very overscheduled. So I was constantly doing, constantly going, never really stopping to process. I think, one of the root causes was I never really processed any of my emotions. And I didn't know what an emotion was,
Right.
let alone to process it. I just knew take care of the next thing in front of me.
Hmm.
And I was sort of like an overachiever, constantly trying to um, stay busy. So
Hmm.
I was not conscious at all. Now I had an interest in nutrition.
Hmm.
So the idea of foods being preventative and healthy was interesting to me.
Hmm.
So when these natural doctors were talking to me about, dietary changes, it was like I was kind of all ears. Like I really
Hmm.
wanted to do that.
Right. It was something that you were interested, something that you were going for. So your definition of success, like most of our definitions of success back then, was to overachieve, do as much as you possibly can, get everything in during the day. Your adrenals get burned out. You get burnt out mentally and emotionally. I'm sure that they said, you know, Dr. Melanie, your adrenals are shot right now, and they're just dumping all sorts of things and hormones all over the place, and your insulin, your cortisol, all of that stuff is just all over the place. And like you said, that those sugary foods, those processed foods, give you literally that immediate gratification, right? Where you just feel so much better about yourself just for that temporary second. But the long term is that you're going to get, you probably had leaky gut, you probably had intestinal permeability, which leads to this cardiac type of a situation. What type of lifestyle changes did you make at that time in order to get yourself back on track?
Yeah. One of the absolute number one things is I stopped eating after dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And I made sure that I was going to get in enough meals and healthy fats, healthy foods during the day to where I wasn't hungry at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured out that when I would eat at night, I didn't feel good the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the number one changes that helped me was almost essentially creating like an intermittent fast,
Mm-hmm.
but without, still having enough, meals during the day, but basically creating this window of time where I gave my system a break.
Right.
And that actually optimized my sleep. So I was now kind of in repair mode a little bit more, as opposed to just like constantly my body is just like fighting inflammation. I was actually able, to start repairing my body. And then the other things that helped was I really cleaned up my diet.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with a practitioner that helped me get rid of gluten, dairy, cane sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Anything inflammatory was taken out of my diet. And back then, the raw vegan movement was like really picking up steam. And so I did trial that a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately landed on more of like a Weston A. Price, nourishing, healthy animal products with cooked vegetables, some
Mm-hmm.
raw, the fermented foods
Mm-hmm.
as well, but very nourishing. That really helped me, stay on track because my body was like starving. I mean,
Right, sure.
it was almost like I was missing nutrients, even though I was eating. I was not eating nutrient dense foods.
Mm-hmm.
So short stint in the raw vegan, and then mostly I did kind of Weston A. Price nourishing foods.
Right. Plant-based diets are good. Every diet has its positives. Every diet has a little something that you have to change because it may not work 100% for somebody. Let's go back to these food allergies. Were they food allergies or were they food intolerances that you had?
Yeah, they really were food sensitivities.
Yes. Did you get a blood test for that?
I did blood tests.
Yes.
I did muscle testing.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that always showed up at that time were wheat, dairy, and cane sugar.
Right.
So those were kind of like the big ones. And then the practitioner's education, and based upon my symptoms, we talked about removing soy and peanuts, anything that was like high mold or really difficult to digest.
Mm-hmm.
We just removed it from my diet. And it was used, the diet was used as a tool. It wasn't like, okay, this is going to fix all of your problems. It was just one tool that was going to help me heal.
Right, because soy, wheat, and corn are fillers that are used in a lot of foods, and they're inflammatory. The way that it's processed and so forth. For our listening audience, it's inflammatory, and we all know what omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids are. Those foods contain omega-6 fatty acids, and that brings about inflammation. We eat much more omega-6s today than we do omega-3s. We need to change that around. How difficult was that for you to change your diet? Because I will tell you, Dr. Melanie, when I had my heart attack and I was used to eating a certain way, it wasn't great, It wasn't bad. It was kind of like in the middle, right? How difficult was that for you? For me, it was really difficult.
Yeah, there were aspects to it that were very hard to change, different habits that were, you know, in our family, especially my family was Greek. So there were these very traditional like things that you have at certain times of the year. And how do I make that gluten free? And I want to have Greek pastries at a wedding, but I'm going to pay for that the next day.
You got to have Slovakia every now and again. Come on
I
now, right?
know you
A
have
little
to, right?
ouzo and a little Slovakia never hurt anybody. Just like with me,
Exactly.
a little Zambuca and a little Sviadel every now and again. You got to do that. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right. Exactly. So it was, how do I create balance? I
Right.
needed to still create balance. But on the other hand, I also had really good accountability. My sister was also kind of going through health struggles. So we kind of teamed up and would go grocery shopping and do our diets very similar. My family became very supportive. My mom would make sure that if we came over to the house, there was gluten-free stuff that we could eat. So I feel like I did have people around me that got it and understood, like, okay, we're doing this. And the aspects that were hard were the social aspects and learning that I could go to a social event and really focus on connecting with people instead of it just being about the food, but really focus on talking with other people.
Right.
That really was a game changer.
Right. Because I would venture to say, because my partner is Greek, from Greece, by the way. Okay. So Dr. Socrates Dragonis, he'll be listening to this.
Yeah.
Dr. Sock, right? Because when I first met him, he said, my name's Socrates Dragonis. I said, get out of here. He said, what's your name? I said, Cardalicchio. He goes, get out of here. So I'm Sicilian and he's Greece. And we have an array of food that's in the office all the time. We have a nice Mediterranean diet and stuff like that. So we like to eat here. And when you're at an event, it is true to have that emotional connection to the people that are there, because part of probably the cultures that you and I were brought up with were, it's a family situation. You got a lot of friends over and there's a lot of discussion that's going on. So that meal is also not just to fuel yourself, but it was a social event, right? And it's easy, and it's much better if you're conversing and having a nice time that way. Because if you're focusing in on all of that, Sviadel and Slovakia, I mean, you can eat, I can eat the whole thing. I can eat the whole thing. Just give it to me.
Yeah.
Homemade Monagot, forget it. It's in my belly before it's even done. So did you have to change that during this time? And how did you do that?
Yeah, I educated myself a lot. I read a lot of books and I read how other people made dietary changes and I read how they made this healthy diet lifestyle change, what worked for them. And then I had to figure out what worked for me. I had to figure out how to make it work for my schedule. And really what it came down to for me was being prepared. So I would make things in advance, or if I'm going somewhere, make sure to bring a safe dish, or if I'm going out, make sure to bring my own snacks or something if I needed them, especially at that time when you're working on your adrenals. It's almost like you're constantly needing fuel. And so I had to make it work for me, but I was also reading so many people's journeys and stories and how they, resolved their health symptoms. Because my goal was I wanted resolution. I didn't want any diagnosis. I didn't want any label. And this is one thing I always tell my clients is reject the diagnosis, because if you tell yourself you have something, if you're, you can program yourself. And, the minute we come into agreement with that, that's what our body is going to think that we have going on. So it's more than just, food is information, but our thoughts are information too.
Absolutely.
So I had to really change how I talked about myself. I had to almost reprogram my mind to be healthy. And that takes developing a healthy relationship with yourself and sitting with, what's really going on under the surface. Like, why did I need all that sugar? And why was I so fatigued? And it's so interesting when I look back, when I was in college for my bachelor's and when I was teaching, I was the most unhealthy. Even when I started making changes, I was still sick. And I think partially that has to do with the fact that it really wasn't my purpose, but I was like pushing really hard to like finish it and get it done. And then it was like when I started my master's degree, it was just easier. There was just less tension. Right. So I had more energy to do that. And so I think a lot of it has to do with, what is our purpose? What really is in alignment for us?
Right. And you have to bring that into the consciousness, right? Because you and I were talking subconscious to the conscious, right? Because you're just living life. You're teaching, you're going to school, you're doing what you do at that particular point. May not be what you want to do and what you should be doing. However, it does become something that you just do subconsciously all the time. The foods that you grab, are you drinking water? Are you eating a healthy diet? And then it becomes conscious, right? And then you're looking at your life and you have to re-examine your life. And you got to sit there and say, none of this makes any sense, correct? Nobody's happy at that particular point. Tell us about that journey. Take your time, because I think this is where the juice is when we're trying to motivate, educate, and inspire, the audience, because whether they call me or you or whatever, you don't know in 10 years from now that this is going to be listened to. And these are stories of inspiration where you've come from here, a heart condition, to here, to bring that to the conscious mind, what you were doing to yourself, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really easy in natural medicine and functional medicine to get on this treadmill that our physical health problems are only physical. And you can do so many cortisol tests, you can take so many rounds of supplements, so many rounds of killers. But eventually, if there's unresolved emotions or experiences that are unconsciously, we aren't even aware that they're happening, but they're kind of happening on that soul level, eventually they're going to come to the surface. And they come to the surface because your body wants you to be healed. Your body is programmed for life. So these things come up, and especially if there's symptoms. So for me, it was almost like a relapse. It was almost like, why is my fatigue back? Why am I reacting to all these foods? So I would do what I knew to do was do the cortisol test, do the thyroid test, do every test to figure out what's going on. When those labs were still perfect, it's like there's another stressor going on. Yeah. And so I really had to be honest with what was going on internally. I could no longer fix and solve and correct through diet and yoga and deep breathing. It was like there's something more here.
Something's missing, right?
Something's missing.
Yeah, that you need to take a look at in your life.
Yeah. And so I started reading more on the soul, and I read a book called Soul Decrees, and I started to understand that our mind, our decision making, and our emotions can affect our body. And so I started on this process of sort of like unraveling some of these symptoms and what they really mean. So like the fatigue, the fatigue can be almost like a defense mechanism. It's almost like a way that our body is saying, if you're not going to hold a boundary, we're going to kick this up over here so that you can like actually rest. And I really just had to become honest with myself and, really go deep and figure out, what is really going on here. Right. And so I essentially had to share things and become vulnerable. And that's really hard to do, especially when I'm more so or less in the Christian community. And it's not always easy to be vulnerable in the Christian community because everything is kind of like whitewashed. It's like,
Right.
oh, like you're a Christian, like you're good, you've got everything figured out. And that's not really the case. Everyone has had, human experiences that have to be processed and
Sure.
resolved. So I just became honest and I became vulnerable with safe people and shared things that my soul I had to get free from. It was like you just have to come out, with early childhood things. You just have to come out with that cannot stay buried, and really nothing can stay buried. Nothing can stay buried, because if there's anything that's buried, it's going to
It just comes up.
manifest as
Yeah,
a
it comes up.
mental health problem, a physical health problem. It is going to manifest. And so I had already done so much on my physical body, and the difference was amazing. I mean, I had already been working in my practice 5 years. The difference was amazing. But all of a sudden, it was like I got an understanding of another layer of healing. And how I was going to extend my healing and make it last was to understand how emotions work.
Right.
And how emotions work is that when they come up to the surface, we can acknowledge them, validate them, process them, see them, hold space for ourselves, or we can numb, or we can bury, or we can try to control something around us. And then that situation never gets processed. And so I kind of learned these other techniques like emotional release work, tapping. I had a practitioner that did, is it NRT or not NRT? It's something
EFT.
where,
EFT, emotional freedom tapping.
yes, they did that with me and really helped me to connect with what was going on in my subconscious. So I can remember having like my arms would itch. I would get like these red rashes, but there was nothing in my diet. Every test came back, no infections. Like I had cleared a parasite. There was no parasite. And this was telling me that basically I was itching to get out of something. I was like irritated by something. And if we can almost think of our symptoms like that, of a stomach problem. What am I having a hard time digesting? If I'm eating the most easy to digest food and I'm still having a stomach problem, what am I having a hard time digesting?
Right, sure.
And so it became a new level and a new language and a new understanding of, this is another way that you can have healing. There's the physical way and there's an emotional path. And so I got really interested in how it's all connected. And basically, for me, how it helps me understand it is in studying the nervous system, especially with the vagus nerve. It's like the vagus nerve houses aspects of our subconscious mind. And it's relaying information very, very quickly from the body to the brain. And it stores information that we will never consciously remember. But if we had moments where we faced overwhelming things in our childhood, those moments can be triggered in a like fight, flight, or freeze response. And that fight, flight, or freeze response typically gets bound up with an emotion. It can be the emotion of anger, the emotion of frustration, the emotion of abandonment, the emotion of shame. And so when we go through life and life happens and we get triggered, all of a sudden our reaction is a lot stronger than what it should be in that moment. But it's because there's unresolved experiences, there's unresolved survival energy that's still hanging out in the nervous system. So for me, it was almost as if, okay, you've done the physical, here's this like ethereal emotional connection. And it's hard because you have to want to go down that path. if you are really in the physical mindset, you don't want to hear that an emotion is a part of your problem. You don't want to hear that you have to take responsibility for what's happening on the inside of you. You want to be like, oh, it's a parasite, let me take the antimicrobial, or oh, it's a, a heavy metal, let me take the binder.
Right.
And eventually you eventually have to learn how to live on this earth with a nervous system. And how we do that is by building a relationship with the rhythm of our nervous system. And for everyone, that's different.
Yes. And this is where a lot of research is going. I have friends that put together Challenges and Summits Biology of Trauma. And there's another, I'm international director of business development for the Shift Institute, and we talk about biology of trauma. So we're going to be talking a little bit after this podcast. So thank you for being vulnerable. I'm going to take it a step further. When you were going through this, if you're so kind enough to share, what were a few of unresolved emotions that you had to work through in order for you to get to the next level?
Yeah, so many. For me, I think it was probably an abandonment wound, like, and a not feeling wanted, not feeling lovable, not knowing my voice, insecurity, not knowing who I was, and not knowing my values, not knowing who I am, not knowing what I like and don't like, because who I became was kind of like a codependent person that valued what everyone else needed or wanted. And as a codependent person, and I think natural medicine is like codependent people are attracted to it. So it's kind of like having to learn who you are, what your identity is. So I think mine can probably be summed up as an identity issue, really.
Where do you think this came from?
It comes from childhood abuse. It comes from generational stuff that was never dealt with. And it comes from a lack of understanding or training up or teaching many generations about trauma and about how our systems really work. And when especially in our medicalized system, where it's a drug and a surgery and a medication for everything, and they kind of separate the soul, they separate the story, the emotions from
100%.
what's really happening. I mean, all of my clients have a story. Not one of them does not have something.
We all have a story, and if somebody says that they don't have a story, they're kidding themselves, right?
Exactly.
They're setting themselves up for failure. So you have to be honest with yourself, and you all have to have a story, and whatever that story is, it is, and you got to get over that story, because if you don't get over that story, it just lingers and lingers and lingers and lingers and lingers and lingers on. Correct. So thank you for being vulnerable and sharing with us, because it takes a lot of strength and fortitude to come over that type of stuff, right? Right. And what were, give me a couple of things that you did to really come over all of this stuff. What was that like?
Yeah. One of the things, I met with a counselor, and they did this exercise with me where it was called episodal writing. And basically you kind of write down what the stressful circumstance was, but you put the date and you let your body know that that's no longer happening. And so you almost kind of write the letter like, I remember this happened and this is how I felt, and I wasn't, protected. And so you kind of very succinctly put it on a piece of paper with a date of when it happened, to let your system know it's no longer happening. And then the other thing is, you really have to reframe the difficult things that you go through as almost like fertilizer for a plant. So it's kind of like it was a bad situation, but it can become something great when you step out of the victim mindset.
Mhm.
Like this can be fuel to actually have growth. You can have growth, you can have change,
Mhm.
you can develop tools to take responsibility. You can learn how to have healthy relationships. And it becomes, instead of those situations having a sting to them or feeling like a burden, like, why is that in my past? I had people help me visualize and reframe those circumstances as, how are you going to grow from this?
Mhm.
And basically that requires forgiveness, that requires sometimes confrontation, if
Mhm.
it's available, sometimes confrontation. um, and it requires, this is why I think identity is such a huge picture. It requires understanding what's best for you as an individual, because as a practitioner, what worked for me, someone else might need a different tool.
Right.
What, it's not like, oh, my way is the best way. I'm just a guide. I may recommend something that is not necessarily for me, but because they have a different set of symptoms, I'm going to refer them to something else. So, like, as an example, EMDR. I
Mhm.
don't, do EMDR, but I refer my clients to get EMDR done,
Right.
because it
Sure.
can be a way to sort of clear your subconscious of
Right.
something that's like a repeated pattern.
Right. Sure.
Um, so, there's so many tools. One of the tools that I really gravitated towards after I finished up my PhD is I started training with somatic experiencing, which is Dr. Peter Levine's um, set of tools to essentially resolve trauma and to,
He just had something in Sedona,
yes,
Arizona. Were you there?
I saw though that he just had a conference.
Yeah, I had a couple of friends of mine
Yeah.
that were there. So these are the people I'm going to get you in touch with. So yes.
Yes. It's like a technology. It's its own technology, and it's
Right.
almost like supporting someone in the here and now. And
Mhm.
then it helps the nervous system balance what has happened. So
Sure.
it's really not about digging things up and talking about problems. It's really more about grounding and discovering safety right here. And
Mhm.
so that is one tool. I mean, I got so much benefit. I know when I started doing the training, it was as if I knew I was at the right place at the right time.
Sure.
For me as a practitioner, it was, this is where you're supposed to be. It was like I did the functional medicine training, I did the nutrition training. It was like, you've got that under your belt, but you need to get a little bit deeper. And where that helped me the most was those chronic illness cases that had done everything nutritional, everything functional medicine, but there was something missing, and that was the soul aspect, the trauma aspect, the emotional aspect, um, sometimes even the stress aspect of, there is still, major stress in your life. That's why this is repeated Lyme diagnosis or
Mhm.
repeated mold diagnosis, is eventually you're going to have to face your soul if you want healing.
I agree. And this is for all of our listeners. This is extremely important because although this is not my wheelhouse, you know, this is Dr. Melanie's wheelhouse, and we work with individuals who help out with this type of stuff because, you know, as my patients say to me, I'm the blood guy. I can read the blood, and I can put together all of that stuff. But this is something that I've been exposed to and that I'm opening up to and understanding a lot more as of late. So I find this very interesting. Well, we do in fact have about 3 or 4 minutes left, and we
Okay.
get into this part. So guess what? We're going to get into the somatic therapy, I think, in a couple of weeks if you're game, and we can talk a little bit more
Cool.
about that, Dr.
Yeah,
Melanie, if you want to. I told you it goes quick, doesn't it?
it does.
Geez, I think I just started scratching the surface of everything. So,
Right.
now, did you also write a book?
I did. Yeah, I
Tell
wrote
us,
a
tell
book.
us, tell us about the book.
Yes, it's called A Natural Path to Wellness. And it basically listed the major changes that I made
Mhm,
to really transition from having chronic symptoms to not having any more symptoms.
mhm.
And it was sort of like an encapsulation of almost 10 years of research and studying and working with
Right.
clients.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I get it. I get it. So we'll talk a little bit about the book the next time. So if people want to get in contact with you, how can they contact you?
Through my website, drmelaniejoy.com, they can
Mhm.
contact me through there.
Okay. I'll put that into the show notes today. I do feel unfulfilled with this conversation. There's more.
Okay.
Do you feel the same way?
I think there's more. I think there's more. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's more to this. So we're gonna have Dr. Melanie come on back, and we're gonna make sure that we complete our conversation. So, Dr. Melanie, boy, we're just chopping it off right here, right? Like, oh my goodness, it's over, right? So thank you very much for being on today. We're gonna, for our listeners, we're going to release this in the next week. So you'll be listening to this, and then from there, we're gonna set up something in about 3 weeks. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Dr. Melanie, thank you very much for coming on today and giving us your personal experience. That's very nice of you, very vulnerable of you, but it also helps teach a lot of different people, what needs to get done. So thank you for coming on today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So thanks everybody for listening. Live your best life. Look for this podcast, share it with family, friends, neighbors, co-workers, important information. And we're going to have Dr. Melanie come on in about 3 weeks so we can finish our conversation. Take care, everybody.